Travels of the Ellis Arbor is an audio narrative set in the world of Bastion using 5e compatible characters. A dark fantasy world with chaos, intrigue, magic, and mystery. The story, setting, and sounds are written by Lonomy and published by lonomy.creative. Tune in for episode 10, Halcyon. As the tension grew throughout the chamber, each member of the crew looked on toward the fetching silhouette of their host. As she glided down the creaking wooden stairs, her hair flowing over her shoulder, her gaze fixed upon Darian with an unusual and knowing glare. "Tell me, Wayfarer, what is it that you know? What is it that the boughs of my chapel revealed to you? You seem an expeditious lot. Perhaps I can help to slow your temptations and ease your concerns about the secrets that I hold." The captain chuckled under his breath, giving pause, he thought, on his response. He could simply strike her if he chose to, but he knew of the weapon at her belt and the deftness with which she drew it. "Honestly, I know not what I saw within your cellar. We went looking for a meal and returned to find a dangerous collection of bodies. Their souls appear warped and in turmoil, so we did what we thought was right." Now Darian assumed a more confident stance, slouching on his right hip, his hands tucked into his belt, and conjuring his most dashing appearance. "Then you did what I and others before me could not. Long have I wanted to ease the burden of wayward souls. Only in death did they seem at peace." Slowly, Nout crept behind the captain, still afloat on his mechanical disc. "Only they didn't seem to want to stay dead, did they, Adeline? I don't suppose you can explain that." The still, composed features of Adeline gripped into a tortured smile. Her teeth, white as alabaster, crept from her lips and told a very different story as to her intent. A bead of crimson crept from her lips and ran down her chin. Against her perfect features, a malice began to stir from behind her facade. "It is the curse of this place. When I became caretaker, I believed that it was to shepherd a flock of the lost to a higher calling. I cried in the night for my own salvation, and it came. The magic of this place has the power to lift and to give life everlasting. What mortal does not want for life to last forever?" At this, she stared deeply into the eyes of Darian, her grimace turned to fascination, her eyes to a red-hot intensity. All the while, the captain concealed any fear that welled within him. "Though, by your stature, I figure this is not the first accursed place to have crossed your path. Tell me, do you still seek refuge in my bower? Do you wish to stay with me and my companions?" In defiance, Darian spit on the ground. His boots dug into the stonework as he sauntered a few feet toward the caretaker. "I'm sorry to inform you that my companions and I don't take too kindly to your kind of hospitality. And besides, even if I were beguiled by your honey words, I have a greater purpose. My own lady would be very disappointed in me if I were to let you continue in your accursed ways." And from the silence behind them, they had failed to notice the creeping column of water that had climbed to the cellar steps. As it rose to the zenith, its form began to shrink and change until it took on the form of a vaguely humanoid silhouette. Its arms and feet began to emerge as if stepping through a waterfall. A cascade of watery hair and features that coalesced into a trickling stream of water. Then, from within the watery silhouette, a pair of yellow, violent eyes. And from the face of the aqueous creature, a similar, malicious grin began to creep. From its mouth, a garbled, watery voice emerged, familiar in sensation, though warped beyond recognition. And from this new, watery incarnation, Adeline spoke. "Then you shall become as I. Welcome to the grave of Adeline." But with brandished finesse, the captain and the caretaker began a dance of sorts, drawing their pistols and firing into each other like the stunning crescendo of a terrific ballad. Turning to his left, the captain leapt for the nearest pew as the human Adeline fired a second and a third shot. Tumbling into the seat, he used those few moments of cover to reload his pistol. And as the water weird began to creep forward, arms lashing with icy cold tendrils, it was more that rose to the action. His spores began to compress within his body, causing him to grow and expand to twice his size. His engorged battle form caused the spikes of his armor to extend, turning the Myconid into a barreling behemoth of terrible stature. And with a roar, he barreled toward the monstrous Adeline, crashing his spiked fists into the flailing tendrils and sending her rocketing toward the cellar. And Nout began to intercede, raising his floating disc as a shield as Carpathian stepped behind. His hand outstretched once more, the flashes of red, arcane lines began to dance from his fingers as he began an invocation. 3 bullets sheared off the metallic surface of Nout's disc as the human Adeline continued her fiery assault. Her pistol empty, she recoiled for a moment, sending her coat backward as she reached for the munitions in her pouch. Using this moment to their advantage, Carpathian completed his incantation. A red, incandescent sigil began to flash as sparks of energy began to sail toward its target. The red tendrils then gripped around her arms, searing a broken, archaic script into her flesh. And as it burned, Adeline screamed in both pain and defiance, only loading a singular shot into her pistol before aiming it at the wizard. With deadly accuracy, the pistol shot rocketed through the air with an intense explosion. Despite Nout's effort, it sailed over his head and plunged into Carpathian's right shoulder, just barely adrift of his neck. With a heavy, cacophonous scream, the wizard reeled backward, clutching at his neck and heaving from the pain of such excellent marksmanship. But pressing the moment to his advantage, Darian rose from his pew, aimed toward the outstretched gun hand of his target, and fired 2 shots. The first squarely hitting the barrel of her pistol and sending it scattering toward the far wall. The second, more potent shot, struck true into Adeline's upper arm, in a spray of violent crimson, as the bullet sheared off a portion of her arm, piercing her flesh before it ricocheted off the wooden stairs behind her. And the human Adeline clutched at her wound before sinking into the floor. At the stairwell, Moore continued to assault the water weird, pulling tendrils of viscous water from its body as it attempted to lash violently at his form. From between his legs, Moore looked down to see that Edward had crept behind him and was aiming his rifle at the creature. So stepping backward over his companion, Moore raised his powerful arms, extending the creature's reach and creating the perfect moment for Ed to strike. A singular, well-aimed pulse from his weapon, arcing from the barrel and consuming the watery form of this creature. With another garbled cry, the pulse of electrical energy all but consumed the creature as its body began to turn to a harsh grey smoke. Though battered and bloody, the human form of Adeline was far from beaten. Spinning her gaze toward Darian, her eyes seemed to roll back in her head, revealing blackened, inky pupils that burned with necromantic power. With a booming, amplified voice, she spit a primordial curse in the captain's direction. His pistol hand outstretched, an arc of black energy began to tie around his fingers before rapidly arcing up his hand, wrist, and forearm. Gripping his pistol tighter, he braced through the pain as he watched the veins of black energy try to worm their way up his arm. His eyes bloodshot and his teeth grit, he bared through the torturous pain as he trained his pistol between Adeline's eyes. Though, in the carnage of combat, his next shot would never come. For before Adeline could complete her wound-tearing invocation, Nout had lowered his shield and reached for another of his arcane-infused weapons. Her gaze drawn, he used this opportunity to activate the magics within a short magical javelin. The runes upon its surface began to glow hot, and it hummed with a fierce intensity. And with a sure and decisive throw, it sailed through the air, shoring a path through the decrepit chapel, rocketing toward the staircase and sinking deep into Adeline's breast. A spray of blood, a sickening thud, and a heavy gasp. As her eyes returned to normal, Adeline sucked in what air she could before her arms fell limply at her side. And with a weakened sigh, her pale, beautiful form sunk against the staircase, now pierced against its wooden railing. From behind them, Morag continued to roar as he tore through the water weird, breathing a sigh of noxious gas onto the creature, and the crackling electricity ignited almost instantly, amplifying its effect and turning the creature into nothing but a cloud of hot smoke. And as the battle reached its end, Adeline turned her blurry gaze toward the broken altar, a once angelic figure that had stood proudly in the chapel as she had once seen it. I only dreamed of the halcyon days of my youth, a calmer, simpler time. There were no monsters or demons, only warm fields of sand upon a calm beach. I only wish they could have joined me there. Adeline. And with what remained of her broken body, her head turned limply to the side, as what was left of her soul loosened its grip upon her accursed, beautiful frame. Travels of the Ellis Arbor is made possible by the generous support of our subscribers, followers, and most notably, our patrons. Thanks to Rob Jenkin, Nathan Ebley, and Ensign Turtle for supporting us so far on this journey. Please subscribe, give a like or a comment, follow us on Twitter, and stay tuned for the next episode. Don't forget, take care of each other.